After the car accident, I realized that my husband, who had been dead for 12 years, was actually alive. He returned with our son and first love to inherit my family business. Standing by my sickbed, he looked at me gratefully and said, "Susie, thank you for taking care of my mother, looking after our Hawthorne family, and now you can rest assured knowing that I'll take care of everything." Then, he swiftly removed my oxygen tube. In that moment before death, I understood that I was just a nanny hired by Colton to take care of his mentally ill mother, also he could be with first love without any worries. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the night Colton proposed to me. Chapter 1. As I opened my eyes, I found myself standing under a spotlight. Colton, dressed in a white suit and holding a ring, was kneeling in front of me. "Susie." He looked at me affectionately. "Will you marry me?" It was the same scene as in my past life, where I had felt happy and sweet, but now I felt nauseous. In my past life, on this very day, I had accepted Colton's proposal. Back then, he had tears of joy, holding me tightly in his arms as if he was holding the whole world. Choked up, he said, "Susie, you are my savior." I had thought back then that he was tormented by his mentally ill mother and that my presence was like a light that saved him. So, 6 months after our wedding, Colton had a car accident and disappeared into the sea, leaving me to shoulder all responsibilities. I dedicated myself to taking care of Colton's mother, raising his brother's child, and handling Hawthorne family's billions of debts. After 12 years, I had bid farewell to Colton's mother, raised my nephew to adulthood, and saw the company thriving. Just when things were looking up, I was hit by a car. Chapter 2. In the emergency room, after being given a critical condition notice, I saw Colton. Thinking I was already dead, tears welled up in my eyes at the sight of him. Colton sighed heavily, reached out, and held my hand. "Grateful yet guilty," he said. "Susie, you've gone through so much over these years. After my elder brother and sister-in-law passed away, leaving a mess, without you, I couldn't have been happy with Lydia." A charming woman, holding a child of about 10, approached and nestled beside Colton. She softly said, "Thank you, sister. It was my idea back then. Blame me after you're gone, not Colton." Colton gently scolded her. "What are you saying? We are one. If there's fault, it's mine to bear." It felt like a thunderbolt had struck me. Unable to speak due to all the tubes in me, I could only stare at them with wide eyes. He leaned in, very solemnly. "Rest assured, I know your sacrifices. Thank you for taking care of my mother, raising my nephew. I will always be grateful for your kindness." As he spoke, he removed my oxygen tube and, in pain, said, "Susie, you've suffered enough. Rest in peace, knowing that I'll take care of the company from now on." In that last moment before death, I finally understood. I was just a nanny carefully prepared by Colton, bearing all the responsibilities he should have taken. While he faked his death and lived happily with his beloved first love for 12 years. After my death, they would inherit my company, with all the money, power, and happiness that he rightfully deserved, while I would be nothing but a handful of dirt. Why? The intense resentment kept me from resting in peace, but luckily, heaven was kind enough to let me be reborn. Looking at the refined and affectionate Colton in front of me, I resisted the urge to slap him and looked around. Chapter 3. Colton's scheme was obviously plotted with the so-called love of his life. And now, in the cheering crowd, I immediately spotted the girl who haunted me in death. Dressed in a white long dress, with long black hair, she had a face that made everyone want to protect her. More charming and captivating than she was 12 years later in my past life, it was evident how much Colton cherished and protected her. And me. The year Colton faked his death, the company went bankrupt with debts amounting to billions. Colton's mother's mental illness worsened, and when I suggested taking her to a mental hospital, Colton's maternal relatives opposed it violently. They didn't want Colton's mother to go to the hospital, so I had to muster the strength to take care of her every day. My nephew was only 4 or 5 years old, an age that required constant worry. In those 2 years, I aged rapidly, and Colton's sick mother stabbed me with a knife 3 times, scalded me numerous times, leaving me covered in scars. Every day, I had to hide from debt collectors with Colton's mother and my nephew. The days of hiding and evading were filled with fear. I had no choice but to start a business and negotiate debt repayment schedules with each creditor. Initially, I often ended up with bleeding stomachs due to drinking for a single deal, constantly on the road seeking help. After 10 years, the company was thriving under my management, and I finally paid off all the debts of the Hawthorne family. At that time, due to drinking and stomach issues, I was emaciated, covered in scars. My hands bore frostbite scars from washing dishes to support Colton's mother and nephew. As for Lydia, delicate and beautiful, clearly someone who had been cherished. Chapter 4. I couldn't help but approach Lydia. I wanted to see, as fellow girls, why she could cruelly toy with another girl's life. When Lydia saw me approaching, her expression changed slightly, glancing behind me. Colton quickly came over, grabbing my wrist and standing in front of Lydia. "Susie, what's wrong with you?" He faced me like he was facing a formidable enemy, trying his best to maintain a smile. I came to my senses and gradually smirked. "Nothing, I was just curious why I hadn't seen this lady before." Colton looked nervous, his whole body tensed up, trying to relax his tone. A friend brought her over, I don't know her well." I sarcastically smiled. "Oh really?" Colton nodded repeatedly. "Yes, Susie, today is our big day, everyone is still waiting." I looked up. Because of my reaction, the friends around us felt a little awkward, but someone quickly livened up the atmosphere. "Hey, Colton, did you not buy a big enough diamond? This won't do, can't you see your girlfriend doesn't agree? Colton, you better hurry up and propose again." Colton also relaxed and confidently raised his eyebrows. "What nonsense are you saying? Susie would never refuse my proposal." He was absolutely confident. In the year we had known each other, Colton helped me overcome the pain of losing my parents. Always putting me first, and his skillful use of PUA had long made it impossible for me to leave him. So he never thought I would reject his proposal. Watching his arrogance and the joy of his calculated achievement, I could no longer hold back my raging anger, and with a loud smack, I slapped Colton. Chapter 5. That slap left him dumbfounded. He was shocked and angry, his face turned pale with anger, but seeing Lydia tearfully shaking her head beside him, he forcibly held back. "Susie, are you going crazy? Why did you hit me?" In the year we had been together, let alone hitting him, I had become so dependent on him that I hadn't even uttered a word of reproach. I blinked back tears. "Colton, I love you so much, and this is how you treat me, isn't it? You proposed to me with a fake diamond ring, your so-called love for me is just a lie, isn't it?" My words were undoubtedly louder than the slap, and with all eyes on us, his face turned bright red. Indeed, he was even unwilling to spend any money on me. The ring he proposed to me with was fake because the real ring was on Lydia's hand. In my past life, shortly after we got married, he confessed to me that the ring was fake. He said the company was currently struggling and he couldn't afford a real ring for me, but he promised that he would definitely buy a real one for me in the future. At that time, he seemed genuinely remorseful and pained. I forgave him soft-heartedly. It wasn't until just before my death when Lydia deliberately showed me the real ring on her finger. That was when I realized that he had bought the unique ring I loved, but had given it to Lydia. Chapter 6. Ignoring everyone's astonishment, I shook off the crowd and left. Colton hastily caught up, grabbing my sleeve. "Susie, listen to me, I couldn't find the ring you liked, I just really wanted to marry you, that's why I lost my mind for a moment." As he spoke, his eyes held displeasure and disappointment towards me. "You said it in public, do you know how much impact it will have on me? Have you ever thought about our future?" He was actually blaming me. I coldly sneered. "Colton, you proposed with a fake ring, how dare you come here to lecture me, have you no shame?" Colton looked incredulous. In the year we had been together, this was the first time I had spoken to him so sharply. Taking advantage of his lack of response, I got into the car and left. After tonight, I believe Colton's status in this circle will plummet. The reason why so many people still hold Colton in high regard is because outsiders are still unaware of the financial situation of the Hawthorne family, thinking that Colton is a once wealthy son. Thinking about Colton and Lydia's current state of agitation and their plans falling through, I couldn't help but smirk. Of course, this was just the appetizer. I paid for news about the Hawthorne Group's financial chain breaking. Companies that had previously cooperated with the Hawthorne family began to cancel partnerships with them. The already crumbling Hawthorne Group was on the verge of collapse. Colton started frantically looking for me, his phone almost exploding with calls. When he finally caught me at the company, Colton's face was a mix of bitterness and excitement. "Susie, I finally found you." He haphazardly put the ring I wanted on my finger, pulled me outside, and said, "Are you satisfied now? Let's quickly go get the license." Chapter 9. I didn't budge. Colton turned back in confusion, masking his impatience. "What's wrong, Susie?" I furrowed my brow in a pretense of conflict. "Marriage, I'm not ready for it now." "How can you not want to marry me?" Colton exclaimed, gripping my hand tightly, then smiled. "Susie, do you lack security?" "It's okay, I'll transfer half of my shares to you, will that make you feel secure?" He took out the share contract, showing a determined smile. The same plot as in my past life. After the proposal, Colton deliberately transferred half of his shares in the Hawthorne family to me to make me more devoted to him. I was deeply moved and also handed over the shares my parents had left to him. Later, when trouble arose in the Hawthorne family, my company also fell apart. All part of Colton's clever schemes. I felt a chill run through my body, couldn't help but sneer. "I don't want to marry you, can't you understand plain words?" Seemingly surprised by my strong stance, Colton was dumbfounded for a while, his gentle expression turning cold in an instant. Suddenly, he let go of my hand. "Fine, since you don't want to marry me, as you wish, we have no relationship from now on." With that, he turned and walked away. I didn't know what was going on in his head, originally not wanting to bother, but I saw a girl in a white dress flash around the corner, and I inexplicably followed. In the hallway, the girl in the white dress threw herself into Colton's arms. Chapter 10. "Colton, why are you suddenly breaking up with her?" Lydia's delicate face was filled with a pale unease. "Without her, how can we be happily together?" Colton, with a confident smile, said. "I just said that on purpose, Lydia, rest assured. Over this past year, I have already made Susie fall deeply in love with me. Her current attitude is just because she's angry about the ring incident. The more I pamper her, the more she acts up. If I act cold towards her, she will suddenly realize that she can't live without me. When she comes to apologize to me, I will pretend to generously forgive her, then give her shares. She will be deeply moved, and at that point, I won't worry about not getting her company." Colton became more and more pleased as he spoke. "Her company is worth a lot of money. If it can revive the Hawthorne family, I don't mind keeping her at home to take care of my mother and nephew while we live a double life outside." Lydia listened with joy on her face. "But what if she doesn't agree?" Colton said coldly. "If she becomes disabled and can only rely on me, how dare she refuse?" Lydia nodded in agreement, gentle yet cruel. "If she still doesn't agree even after becoming disabled, then make her disappear. By then, with money, you won't have trouble finding a wife willing to sacrifice for you." In the scorching summer weather, I felt chills all over. Their initial plan wasn't to fake their deaths, but to suck my company dry and revive the Hawthorne family. I would either be accidentally ruined or killed by them. After the Hawthorne family had no chance of recovery, they chose to abandon this mess. I really wanted to go in there and strangle these two, but thinking of my plan, I forcibly held back. Letting them die would be mercy. The hell I went through, how could they not experience it as well? Chapter 11. In the days that Colton waited for me to apologize, I didn't idle around. I quickly signed contracts with the companies that had terminated their agreements with the Hawthorne family. In just a few days, my company's reputation soared. Colton, patiently waiting for a few days, finally couldn't resist coming to the company to find me when he saw no sign of me softening towards him. As soon as he saw me, his face turned cold, not speaking to me, waiting for me to come and placate him. Pretending not to see him, I discussed the company's development direction with the vice president. Susie, do you treat me as dead? Seeing me ignore him, Colton stepped forward quickly and blamed me. Only then did I pretend to look at him in surprise. Colton pursed his lips. Susie, as long as you admit fault, I will forgive you. I was truly shocked. Was he out of his mind? Seeing my silence, he thought I was just being stubborn. Softening his tone instantly, he sighed lightly and hugged me. All right, Susie, stop being mad at me. I was just being foolish because I love you too much. You have no idea, my biggest dream is to marry you. If you are willing to marry me, I'm willing to do anything for you. Don't be angry. Recently, Greg has been asking about when you'll marry into our family. Greg, that cunning nephew. Because I had no children, I was good to him in every way, and he seemed to respect me a lot. Until the moment of death, I finally understood that Greg had been transferring money to them all along. He had always known that Colton wasn't dead. And he was supporting them. Seeing me silent, Colton furrowed his brows anxiously. I knew he was getting impatient. With the Hawthorne family on the brink of collapse, he urgently needed my company as a lifeline. After some thought, I smiled and said, all right, for the sake of everything, let's get married in a few days. A flash of wild joy passed through Colton's eyes, but he quickly suppressed it, saying, okay, Susie, you will be the happiest bride in the world. I'll go prepare right now. He hurriedly left, presumably to share this good news with Lydia. I quietly followed him and unsurprisingly saw Colton making a phone call, saying, I knew Susie couldn't live without me. I just acted cold towards her for a few days, and she immediately agreed to marry me. Darling, wait for me at Yunting, I'll be right there. I discreetly sent the address Colton mentioned in a text message. The recipient was Lydia's parents. Chapter 12. During these days, I not only focused on the company but also found Lydia's parents. I gave them some money, asking them to find a way to get Lydia to marry Colton. Lydia's family was just an ordinary one. Upon hearing that their daughter was not only dating the CEO of Hawthorne but also someone was giving them money to arrange their daughter's marriage, they couldn't contain their joy and readily agreed to make it happen. That very night the news was sent out, they caught the two rolling on the bed in Lydia's house. Immediately, they put on a show of crying, making a scene, and threatening to hang themselves, forcing the two to get married. I'm telling you, I recorded everything just now. If you don't marry my daughter, I'll expose you online. Let's see if the Hawthorne Group can afford this scandal. As I approached, the middle-aged couple on the ground were threatening, with Colton looking helpless and Lydia pale, clutching the blanket to cover her body full of red marks. Seeing me, Lydia couldn't hold back and screamed. Susie. Colton panicked and quickly walked up to me. Susie, it's not what it looks like, let me explain. I raised my hand and slapped Colton, my face full of pain. Colton, we are about to get married, how could you do this to me? Colton was dazed by my two slaps, but Lydia reacted swiftly, disregarding everything and knelt in front of me. Susie, I'm sorry, it's all my fault. I loved Colton too much. The thought of you two getting married made me so miserable that I lured Colton here, drugged him, and had a relationship with him. Please forgive Colton, it's all my fault. TSK. Although Lydia looked innocent, she was capable of anything. Blaming herself for everything just to get me to marry Colton, so they could live their double life. I turned to Colton. Is this true? Colton gritted his teeth, gazing at me lovingly. Yes, it was all Lydia. This despicable person drugging me. I was unaware, Susie, I only love you. So this is the case. Colton turned pale. Then I won't marry Lydia, I only want to marry you. TSK, if anyone heard this, they would definitely think Colton was too devoted to me. Surely, Colton had the same idea, and he looked at me expectantly. I raised my head, touched. Colton, I understand your feelings, but for the sake of the company, you should still marry Lydia as a temporary measure. After all, the Hawthorne Group cannot afford any more negative news. After this is over, you can divorce Lydia, and then we can get married, okay? Chapter 13. I tactfully persuaded, and Colton's face showed some hesitation, about to agree. Lydia cried out. No. We can't get married. There was fear in her eyes, perhaps thinking about Colton's crazy mother. I recently investigated her. When she was dating Colton, she had once met Colton's mother, who happened to have a sudden attack and almost stabbed Lydia with a knife. Although she wasn't actually harmed, the sight of Colton's mother going crazy scared her. After Lydia spoke, her parents suddenly rushed forward, trying to stop her. Shut up. You slept with him and still won't marry him, do you want to die? I'm telling you, you must go get the certificate at dawn, or I will immediately post the video online. Lydia looked hopeless, but Colton was threatened and nodded immediately. Okay, I'll marry her. Susie, trust me, I still love you the most. Once I resolve this, I will marry you. I nodded happily, and Colton breathed a sigh of relief. He was absolutely confident that I wouldn't give up on him, especially with Lydia's parents threatening him. He didn't think much further. The next morning, Colton and Lydia got the certificate. Lydia looked guilty as she gazed at me. Susie, it's all my fault. I'll go back home during this time and won't be with Colton. Please don't worry. I chuckled, trying to avoid Colton's mother. This was impossible. Lydia looked at me, puzzled, but quickly understood. A car stopped in front of her, the door opened, and a group of people rushed out. Leading them was Colton's mother, who immediately grabbed Lydia's arm, followed closely by her maternal relatives. Colton, now that you've married your wife, you've grown up. You both need to take good care of my eldest sister. Colton's mother also smiled gently, appearing harmless. But Lydia was already trembling. Not to mention Lydia, even I felt a bit scared seeing Colton's mother. Chapter 14. Colton's mother's madness came and went, sometimes gentle and elegant, harmless, smiling at you, doing household chores. But you never knew when she would have an episode. One moment she could be smiling at you, the next she could grab a fruit knife and attack. Sometimes she would be sweeping the floor and suddenly swing the broom at you. Looking at her fragility, once she went crazy, she was as strong as an ox, completely uncontrollable. She was like a sword hanging over her head, not knowing when it would fall. How could Lydia not enjoy this fear and anxiety? Lydia, enjoy your life that belongs to you. After I finished saying this to her, her body suddenly paused, emotions surging on her pale face. There was confusion, incomprehension, and bewilderment. When she looked up at me, her face was enveloped in fear, struggling intensely. I found it strange, but Colton still innocently smiled and said, Susie, wait for me to marry you. I chuckled coldly. Fool. Colton didn't understand. I didn't bother with him, and instead discussed investing in a special education school with my friends. Chapter 15. When I was 15, my parents took me to a special education school where I met many special children. God closed a window for them, but they still worked hard, which deeply impressed me. Later, my parents asked about my dreams. I said, I want to provide them with jobs in the future. At that time, I heard that people with disabilities found it challenging to secure good jobs. In my past life, due to my parents' deaths, I closed myself off and handed the company over to professionals. Later, when I got married to Colton, the Hawthorne family drained the company, and I forgot about my dream. After reopening the company, no one believed in me, and with huge debts, I couldn't hire anyone. Until I hired the first person, a computer genius who couldn't speak naturally. With his help, I recruited more employees. They might have their own unique qualities. But they worked hard, progressed, and had a strong sense of responsibility. They were probably much stronger than Colton and Lydia. Chapter 16. When I was busy working, the private detective often sent me interesting videos. In the videos, Colton's mother went crazy, chasing Lydia with a knife, making Lydia cry loudly in fear. Colton tried to stop her but ended up getting stabbed by his mother, creating chaos in the house. Such scenes happened almost every day. Perhaps Colton couldn't handle it and came to see me every day. I kept them waiting for a while before meeting them. Susie. Colton shouted, his tone completely different from before. In just a month, Colton seemed like a different person. Wrinkled clothes, messy hair, looking completely worn out. No, it wasn't just his appearance. Even his gaze had changed, as if it was the Colton I had seen before dying. I was surprised and looked at Lydia, her face covered in bruises. As soon as she saw me, she asked directly. Are you the Susie from our past life? Lydia and Colton from our past lives? I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Okay, come on, it's good that you're here. Finally, I can resolve my grievances. Colton quickly grabbed my shoulder. Susie, why are you laughing? I know you're the Susie from the past life. Come with me quickly. Our mom torments me and Lydia every day, we can't take it anymore. I pushed him away abruptly, and with wounds on his body, Colton fell to the ground, his face turning pale. Colton. Lydia exclaimed softly. Colton, in pain, grimaced and angrily said. Susie, what do you mean? Are you not planning to come back and marry me? Not planning to go back and take care of Mom? I couldn't help but laugh. It seems living longer sharpens the mind, finally figured it out? Lydia looked anxious, biting her lip. Susie, you've taken care of Mom for so long. You have experience, so come back with me. Besides you, no one can take care of her properly. Yeah, Colton frowned. Wasn't it you taking care of her in the past life? You've taken care of her for so long, you must have feelings for Mom. Are you willing to abandon her? I had a deeper realization of Colton's thick-skinned nature. I smiled calmly. Of course, I would never abandon her. Colton and Lydia's eyes showed a hint of surprise. The next moment, I immediately said. That's why I sent Lydia to your mom. She should be quite satisfied. After all, Lydia was fragile and couldn't restrain her when she went crazy like I could. Most of the time, Lydia would cry and hide in her room, making Colton's mother even happier. Every time Colton's mother went crazy and started hitting the door with a knife, Lydia would faint in fear. Lydia's lips turned pale, but Colton's eyes lit up with anger. Susie, you are a ruthless person, calculating us like this, how can you be so malicious? Chapter 17. I stepped forward and slapped him. Hatred from past and present flooded in, my eyes sharp. Colton, how dare you talk to me about conscience? In the past life, you tricked me into marrying you, leaving me with billions in debt, a crazy mother, a nephew. All of which you shoved onto me, while you lived carefree with Lydia. You made me responsible for your entire life. The real malicious ones are all of you. If it weren't for their schemes, I wouldn't have ended up so miserable. My stern words startled Colton, and he stammered. Wasn't it just a few years of taking care of your mother and nephew? Why are you so angry about it? I laughed, a bitter laugh. They could do such despicable things, so they certainly wouldn't care about my questions. Fortunately, I knew they had no conscience. Calming myself down a bit, I smirked. Yes, it was just a few years of taking care of them. Since you find it so easy, from now on, take good care of them. Also, this time don't think about deceiving other innocent girls into being your maids. I will supervise you throughout. And don't even think about running away. No matter where you go, I will find you and inform your mother's relatives of your whereabouts. With each statement, their faces turned paler. Colton's mother's relatives were not to be trifled with. Finding them could mean tearing them apart. These words provoked them, and Colton and Lydia rushed towards me, shouting. You took care of us for so long in the past life, even a stone would develop feelings. How can you just let go like this? Your mother gave birth to you, raised you, and you're not willing to take care of her. It's you who lacks conscience. I fear nothing. Suddenly, a 4 or 5-year-old boy hugged my leg, his eyes red. Susie, I want to follow you, I can't leave you. Chapter 18. I almost forgot about this little rascal, and he actually came back. Susie, I'm Greg. Greg cried. I just want to be with you, I want to be with you forever. I slowly pried open his fingers. Oh. Greg, I remember you've been transferring money to someone named Lydia. When I asked you, you hung your head and said she was your girlfriend. I thought, you've grown up, it's normal to be in love, so I didn't bother. It was only when I was on my deathbed that I found out you've known they were alive all along, conspiring against me with them, isn't that right? By the end, Greg was kneeling on the ground, aghast. I used to treat you like my own child, but forgot, your last name is Hawthorne, you are a child of the Hawthorne family. In this life, take care of yourself. As I turned to leave, Greg grabbed my sleeve, cautiously, full of hope, and asked. Can you give me another chance? I replied word by word. Dream on. Despairingly, Greg sat on the ground, while Lydia and Colton, who still didn't want me to leave, came to grab me but were suddenly kicked aside. I turned around and, as I looked back, my eyes widened, meeting the gentle and bright eyes of the newcomer. Sorry, CEO Susie, this is someone who just came to apply for a job. I didn't stop him. It's okay. I smiled. He's an acquaintance. The usually reserved and quiet boy blushed slightly, raised his hand in a gesture indicating long time no see. Chapter 19. In the past life, when Dylan applied to my company, he had a prestigious school background. When I first saw him, I was amazed and didn't understand why he was applying to our company. He pointed to his throat, gesturing 3 words. I can't speak. I gestured that it was okay, I could understand sign language. After leaving the special school in the past life, I learned sign language and could both use and read it. His eyes brightened as he conversed with me through gestures. I learned that his job search was not going well, and he hoped to work in my company. At that time, I was short of staff, and even though I knew it was a risk, I reluctantly brought him in. As we spent more time together, I realized that Dylan wasn't actually struggling to find a job. Even though he couldn't speak, he was intelligent and a genius, receiving many olive branches. The reason he chose to join my company was that my parents had supported him in the past, and we had crossed paths at the special school. It's just that I didn't remember. Later, we developed the company together, hired many employees, and through our collaboration, the company flourished. In my previous life, the thing I worried most about before dying was Colton taking over the company and driving away Dylan and the employees. They were already struggling. Chapter 20. Strangely enough, Colton and Lydia, upon seeing Dylan, actually ran away with their tails between their legs. I was puzzled at first, but then Greg, before leaving, whispered. Susie, be careful, he's a lunatic. He drove with us to our deaths. I was stunned. Then I was tightly embraced by someone with a cool touch. Dylan silently shed tears, looking at me in confusion and sadness. The memories of the past, the silent love, seemed to overflow. I reached out and hugged him tightly. In this life, Dylan is still a sophomore student, with some time left before graduation. But with his experience from the past life, I entrusted the company to him without worry. He understood my concerns and somehow managed to retrieve the employee records from the former company one by one. In the future, we will still be together. Dylan gestured. I couldn't help but tear up. Yes, we will still be together. Chapter 21. Due to my actions, the Hawthorne Group closed down 3 months earlier, owing debts that skyrocketed from a few $100 million to tens of billions. Tens of billions of debt weighed down on Colton and Lydia, debts they wouldn't clear in this lifetime. Additionally, they were burdened with a mad mother and a young nephew. Especially Colton's mother, in just 2 months, she tormented them to the point of being unrecognizable. I was worried they might run, so I made sure to keep an eye on them. As expected, on a rainy day, they escaped. I informed Colton's mother's family about their whereabouts, and they brought them back. Colton and Lydia knelt down, begging for money to send Colton's mother to a mental hospital, but they were ignored. I vaguely remembered that when Colton's father married his mother, he used some unsavory means, which Colton's mother's family resented, vowing to torment them. This escape pushed Colton's mother over the edge. She had an episode, breaking Lydia's leg. Now, Colton, who was already falling apart, had to take care of a disabled person. He came to me in a frenzy. Susie, Susie. I know I was wrong in my past life. I shouldn't have left you behind. I've changed this lifetime, please come back and help me. I smiled faintly. You're not even halfway there yet. You still have to endure. Colton tearfully pleaded. Susie, only you can help me now. Lydia is now disabled. It seems that in Colton's eyes, nothing was more important than himself. Clearly, Lydia, who had been deceived by love all along, couldn't take it anymore. She lunged at Colton. Bastard, clearly I've been persevering for you all this time, how dare you reject me? Divorce, let's divorce immediately. Seeing my indifference towards him, and realizing that if Lydia divorced him, the mess at home would fall on him, he was left in a predicament. Colton refused to divorce at all costs. Now that you are disabled, how can you leave me? Don't forget, we still have joint debts as a couple. Lydia deflated like a balloon, completely despairing. Two people who loved each other so much in their past life seem to have turned into bitter enemies in this lifetime. But this is far from over. After accumulating massive debts, they moved out of the villa area and rented a small apartment of a few dozen square meters. Colton had found a job initially, but due to poor rest, he had issues at work and was fired, so he had to go to construction sites to carry bricks. Since Lydia became disabled, she lay there all day, lifeless, only getting up in fear when Colton's mother had an episode. Due to the lack of money, Greg couldn't afford to go to school. All they could do was look at the sky outside the window every day, feeling the despair that repeated day after day. Chapter 22. When I saw them again, it was already a year later. I almost didn't recognize Lydia, she was so thin as if she were a skeleton, looking completely listless. Colton was covered in dirt, with a scar on his face from being hit at the construction site. Greg seemed vacant. I heard that they were afraid Greg would wander off, so they locked him in a 5-square-meter room every day. When they saw me, I was in the middle of a company division ceremony. Each of them showed envy on their faces. Susie, can you lend me some money to send my mom to a mental hospital? Colton asked in a flattering tone. How can that be? I smiled like a demon. In the past life, you didn't even come back to see your mom when she died. How can you not fulfill your filial duties in this lifetime? Don't worry, as your former daughter-in-law, I will ensure her long life with money. You won't be able to escape in this lifetime. You'll be miserable together for the rest of your lives. I pronounced their death sentence. They left in a daze, unable to straighten their backs. As if an invisible mountain was pressing down on them, leaving their entire lives hopeless. Chapter 23. Later, burdened with debts and chased by debt collectors, they moved to a bridge tunnel. Under the torment of Colton's mother, Lydia's mental state also began to deteriorate. Colton faced difficulties in all aspects of work and was occasionally beaten up by debt collectors. And all of this, I had experienced in my past life. Watching that family in the bridge tunnel, living in squalor, I slowly revealed a smile. Dylan gently held my hand, and I held his back. I was grateful that I didn't come back to life just to stab them to death. Otherwise, because of them ruining my life, I wouldn't have found happiness again. And from now on, all I had to do in my life was to watch them in that dilapidated, damp bridge tunnel. No sunlight, no hope for a better day. They would torture each other forever, never being able to escape.